Hello everyone, Christina Werner here. Welcome to a walkthrough video for my July 2025 release. In this video, I'm going to be showing you every single product, every single bundle that I designed for the July release. And you'll also see all of those products used on actual cards. So like I've done in the past, you're going to see a mixture of all of the products on the cards. I'm going to show you instances for every single time the product is used. And let's get into it. The Little Star bundle includes 3 products. We have a 4x6 stamp set, a die set that coordinates and also has some additional imagery, as well as a 6x9 stencil pack that has 4 stencils in it. So I'm going to talk about each one of these products individually, and then we'll get into the cards. So in this stamp set, it really works hand in hand with the dies. Similar to my Merry Trees stamp set or the Happy Birthday words or thank you words stamps and dies, this thin lined stamp right here coordinates with the thicker capital letter die. So you can cut them out and have individual letters as shown here. Something that's interesting to note is that the welcome word, you can both stamp it and cut it out, as well as die cut the word welcome and then stack it with the 2 die cuts together. So most of these images right through here coordinate directly with the stamp set, but we do have some extras. Here's this onesie right here. You can see on this side, you get a background piece and then also the outlined die cut itself. You also have some stars and hearts and this large outline heart as well. So there's quite a few images that don't directly coordinate with the stamp set that you can use on their own. And then when it comes to the stencils, they are 6x9, so they're really quite large, and you can layer them together to have some really fun patterns. So I actually recreated this one up here. You'll see it here on a card. And then I did a different pink version for some girl baby cards. All right, let's get into the actual cards and let's take a look. Here's a card using that stencil that I said that I recreated it exactly how it's shown on the packaging. So I first created the ink blended background, and I actually have the other piece that goes with it. So this was actually, let's see, how was this cut? It was like this. This was the full half sheet, and I cut it in half so I could actually get 2 A2 card fronts with just one stenciling. I've paired it with the stamped baby and then die cut with the larger letters. I have the smaller reading right here. The welcome up here was stamped and heat embossed in white embossing powder on top of midnight cardstock and then cut out with the coordinating die. For a fun baby girl card, I used the same stencil set but with different colors. I stamped the Oh Baby in both dragon fruit and plumberry ink, having them kind of transition in the center. And then I created that really fun onesie image and put one of the die cut hearts right on top. And you can see how this was cut out of that full sheet just like that. And I actually have some extra pieces for another card. I have a few more cards that I want to show you, and for each of these I did a boy version and a girl version. So for the boy version, I actually stamped and heat embossed in metallic embossing powder. This was a silver. And then over here I did everything in white. But you can see how the fun onesie die cut, you can add some additional colors to add shading, make it almost look like a little baseball tee. I think it's so super cute. And for my second set of cards with boy and girl, I did a really simple one. I ink blended some cardstock and then stamped the baby outline word and then cut it out using the larger die. And then for all of these little tiny stars here at the bottom, I stamped them individually, which did take a little bit of time, but I think it's a really fun look and it turned out great. So this is the Little Star bundle. Once again, it's a 4x6 stamp set, coordinating dies with some extra image dies as well, and then a 6x9 stencil pack. The Daisy Bouquet stencils is a stencil pack of 4 stencils that when you use them together, they create a really fun daisy scene. So let's take a look at the stencils themselves. This stencil will do the background color. You've got the daisies, the stems, and then also the center. So when you use them together, it creates the full picture. Now, I did want to mention for this one, you can use it as is, but I found that it was a little bit easier to get a really clean image if you put a little bit of Pixie spray on the back. Pixie spray is a repositionable adhesive. It's very, very low tack, but it's meant for stencils, and it works really, really well on this one. That being said, you don't have to use Pixie spray on the back of this stencil. I just found it made it a little bit easier to use. So let's take a look at 3 cards that I made using this stencil pack. For this first card, I was going for all the drama. So I used Midnight ink for the background. For the flowers themselves, I wanted it to transition through a few different colors. So I started with Plumberry, Dragon Fruit, and then onto Honeycomb. And then the stems were ink blended with Tide Pool. The little bit of the kind of almost like a bokeh effect was added using white pigment ink through one of the splatter texture stencils. For this card, I really wanted to go for almost like a sunset scene. So I kept the daisies completely white, and I did the stems in avocado, and then this background actually went from Midnight, Plumberry, I think I did a little bit of Dragon Fruit, and then on to Honeycomb. And this third one is nice and clean and simple. I really do love a white daisy. And I love that this stencil set gives you the option to have white daisies, just letting that white cardstock show through, or you can use some of your colorful inks to give it a different look. So I used Pebble in the background here, and then Avocado for the stems. So this is the Daisy Bouquet stencil pack. There's a lot of different looks you can get with this stencil set, including isolating the flowers by themselves. The Breakfast Buddies bundle actually has 2 items in it. I've just got it in a storage pocket. I've got the coordinating dies back here, and then the 6x8 stamp set. So I did want to show you something that's really fun about this particular stamp set, and it's on the back of the stamp packaging. It actually gives you almost like a guide or a recipe for how you can build each one of these images. So as you can see here, you start with the individual pieces, and then you kind of puzzle piece them together as you stamp. When you get to the final image, you can choose to put the little happy face and the arms and legs if you want. If not, you can omit those. You don't have to use those. In fact, when it comes to the dies are not going to work if you want the legs and arms unless you're going to stamp those on some cardstock underneath where you have your die cut adhered. So, and you'll have a little bit of a white outline, and I'll show you that here in a moment. These are really, really fun, and the only thing you need to do when you're doing all this stamping is just you might want to look at the finished image to kind of remind yourself how everything pieces together. But it does come together fairly easily. So let's take a look at some of the cards that I made using this bundle. First up, I have a card with all of the images except the berries. I didn't have room for the berries on this 5x7 card, but you can see how they come together really nicely. One thing I wanted to give you as far as a tip goes is that when it comes to stamping the egg, I found that using powder ink from Concord and Ninth was perfect. However, I did need to stamp off for the lightest layer. So I stamped on some scratch paper, removed the scratch paper, and then stamped directly onto my project. And that just gives it almost like a half tone, makes it just a little bit more pale. Now, the darker blue that comes in for the shadows, that is actually the powder ink at full strength. So that's the difference between those two there. So as you can see, this is really fun. I also found it really fun to pick out colors for the bacon. The colors that I found worked best, and they're used here, is Cayenne and Sorbet. Sounds strange to use sorbet for bacon, but that actually is kind of the color of bacon. I thought that was really fun. Speaking of bacon, let's look at this card. I kept it really, really simple with just a little bit of ink blending around the outside edges. I die cut my little bacon friend right here and then stamped the greeting, "Don't go bacon my heart." For my third card, I have the berries, and for this one, I stamped the strawberry mainly in poppy, and then the other pink strawberry, sometimes there are pink strawberries out there, I stamped in actually watermelon, which seemed wrong to use an ink named watermelon to stamp a strawberry, but you know, it all worked. For the blueberry itself, the blueberry ink is a little bit too dark to have a black stamped face, so I actually stamped the face in white pigment ink, but I thought that was super cute. And for my fourth and final card using this bundle, I just decided to stamp that little egg, put the You're Exceptional, kept it really, really simple, did a little bit of ink blending and some spots with the splatter texture stencil. So this is the Breakfast Buddies stamps and dies. You can get them together in a bundle over at concordandninth.com. I think these are super cute, and this was sort of my answer to those of you who want images that can be colorful, but you don't want to color them yourself. The More Thin Frames A2 and A7 dies is something that I really wanted to create after the original A2 thin frames and A7 thin frames dies were released. I wanted like that in-between size for both of those die sets. So let's take a look. These are the original die sets. I just wanted that measurement that's like right in between. So that's exactly what these are. And you'll notice that these, the new kind of in-between size, have a little bit less metal on the edges. And that is for a specific reason. That's so they can fit directly inside, so you can store all of your A7 thin frames dies together. And then you can store all of your A2 thin frames dies together. So they just nest inside one another. You'll just need to store the two greetings that come with the new die set, store them somewhere else. I'll probably just give them their own storage pocket. There were a couple of reasons why I included these dies in the center with greetings. The first reason is I really just wanted some additional die greetings for this release. The second reason is I wanted to fill in that interior space. Frames that are smaller than, the smallest ones that I included on the original die sets, I don't imagine myself using them any smaller than that. So I thought, I'm just gonna fill in that space in the center with some die cut greetings. And these are actually really fun greetings to use on your cards. So let's look at some cards using both the frames and the die cut greetings. First up, here is the A7 frame. It's that in-between size from the More Thin Frames. And I've also used a heart for my Essentials dice. And then the greeting, this is Thankful for Your Friendship. For this card, I did a simple ink blending, and this is the A2 from the More Thin Frames. And then I've got that You're the Best, and I've stacked it up nice and thick so it looks substantial. And these little hearts are also from my Essentials dies. On this card with the Breakfast Buddies little berries, I have that A2 frame along the outside. This card featuring the Daisy Bouquet stencil pack, I have this white stacked greeting of the Thankful for Your Friendship, and that stacks so beautifully. For a little tip on that, I found it easiest to die cut the actual greeting die itself 4 times on cardstock that had double-sided adhesive on the back. That made it super easy to stack them. I did that for this version of the stacked dies as well. This one has the A2 More Thin Frames on the outside edge, and then I've got the You're the Best greeting that's in the center of the die set, and I have that little halo on the outside cut out of vellum, just so it helps the greeting stand out a little bit on this very colorful background. Both of these cards have frames cut using the More Thin Frames set. This one's in white and this one's in silver. And then for this final card, I used the A2 More Thin Frames. And I don't know if you can see, but I actually stacked 4 of those frames and adhered them all together so that I'd have a little bit more dimension. It also matches the amount of cardstock I used for my greeting. So that is the More Thin Frames A2 and A7 dies. Hope you guys enjoy these additional sizes for all of those thin frames. The Splatter Texture Bundle includes 3 products. We have a 6x6 stamp set. It's actually more about a 5.5 by 5.5. And you've got a nice kind of a really filled in gradient coming down. I'll show you some examples of that being stamped. On the 6x8 stamp set, it's actually broken up into separate stamps. It's a little hard to see in the product image, over at the Concord and Ninth shop because it doesn't show how each stamp is separated, but I wanted to have it in segments. So if you wanted to just stamp a little bit of a little splatter texture on your cards, you definitely could. And I really wanted this large kind of border one so that you could have a gradient coming in from the edge of something. They're really fun to work with. I will point out which ones I use in the card examples in just a moment. And then lastly, I have a 6x9 stencil pack. It has 2 stencils. And you can see on the back here that one is very, very airy. It doesn't have a lot of splatter, while the other one has a lot of texture. So I did this on purpose so that you can really get a different look. Now, if you want to use this stencil once, rotate it 180 degrees and use it again, you'll get more compact splatter. Or you can use this one down here that has some larger bits and pieces. They're really fun to work with. So let's look at some cards that I made using these 3 products. And practically every single card I made for the July release used something from this bundle. I think there's only a few that I did not put splatter on. So let's just take a look at all of the cards. So first off, we have this one. I used the more airy stencil, and when I stenciled it onto the card front itself, I just omitted the area where I'd already stamped the egg and the grading. And then I just ink blended from the edge. It makes it look a little bit more cohesive. I used the more dense splatter texture stencil for this area down here at the bottom on this Breakfast Buddies card. For this one, you can tell I was really feeling the pebble color in this release. For this one, I did the texture background using the more dense stencil. I added that on top when I was doing the background color on the daisies. So I first stenciled the background, and then before I removed the stencil from my project, I put the splatter texture on top, and then I get that double look. And I just had it kind of fade up, fade away as I moved up the daisy image. Here are some examples of that background stamp. I actually had, probably about that much of the background stamp hanging off the edge of the bottom of the card. So, because I really wanted it to only have the darker area at the bottom of the card, but you can see how that tone-on-tone effect looks great. I just did Plumberry ink on Plumberry cardstock and Midnight ink on Midnight cardstock. For this card, I used a little bit of gold embossing paste. Let's look at that a little closer. So you can kind of see the dimension and the texture on that. I used the more kind of sparse splatter texture to add that on top. For this card, I used the more dense splatter texture, and I actually just used white pigment ink over the top, and that just really gave it almost like a bokeh look on top of this scene. I have a couple of cards here where I used that border stamp from the 6x8 stamp set. And all I did was just stamp each edge with the border stamp, and it gives it a really nice look going all the way around. So on this one, I used powder cardstock with Harbor ink. And over here, this is Juniper cardstock with Midnight ink. All right, and then this actually uses one of the large stamps from the 6x8 stamp set. Let me grab this right here. It's this large stamp right here. It's just about the perfect width for an A2 card. You can see how it kind of goes right there. And then all I did was stamp it on one end and then rotated the card and stamped it on the other end. And you almost get like the perfect little splatters. I think it kind of looks like a night sky or a galaxy. Looks really, really neat when you kind of rotate it and stamp from both directions on this one. So that's the splatter texture bundle. I think there's a lot of different things you can do with it. I think it would look great, with a little bit of that texture stamped on die cut letters, or coming out from behind a die cut, or even a little greeting, I think it would be really fun to even have some of that splatter coming out from behind the berries here. Lots of different ways to use the splatter texture bundle. So this is the July 2025 release from Christina Werner with Concord and Ninth. I hope you'll check it out. Everything is available for shopping and shipping over at concordandninth.com. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in another video very soon.